Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Sphinx organization, I just wanted to thank you all for being here. We're very excited to have this conversation that we were just chatting about backstage. Is a continuation of a lot of the themes that we have all heard today. So we're really excited to get into it and also encourage you to engage with us. So just remember, we'll have time for question and answer near the end of the panel. So if you want to submit your questions to the Hopin app, please do. You can also use the two mics there on the aisles. So I'm Jennifer Bowman. I'm the Director of Community and Learning at Houston Grand Opera. But I am also a proud alumni of the Sphinx Lead program. I'm here with this illustrious panel to talk about the pathway. And when we are thinking about equity and representation and excellence and all of the initiatives that have formed through programming as well as philanthropy that have given us some results, but not sustained results, what do we need to do next? So I have a group of people here who come from different parts of the pathway, working with young people in our pre-college area, higher education, professional area, and they have something to say. So I'll allow them to introduce themselves and then also tell us what they tell their family and friends about what they do for a living.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Ariel Davis. I'm a cultural consultant based in D.C. Woo woo. Thanks for everyone that's joined today. And what do I tell my family? Typically, I tell them that I spend my time questioning the ways that the music industry is set up, particularly in the nonprofit space. And not everyone gets that, but that's what I tell them.
Hey, hi, everybody. Nice to see you. My name is Mateen, Milan. I tell people that I help students learn music for free. And I do so at the Peabody Preparatory. I lead two programs. One's called Tuned In. Oh, yeah, woo, woo. One's called Tuned In, which is the bread and butter program. And then I lead a smaller program called the Baltimore-Washington Pathways program, which is part of a national cohort of folks helping get our kids into college. So.
Hi, everyone. My name is Khandeya Sheppard. I am the manager of community partnerships at the Peabody Institute of the Johns Hopkins University. I'm also an alumni of Berklee College of Music, so I kind of in the gray area space. What I get to do is I get to meet students at their college part of their pathways and figure out what they want to do next in their career. So what options are all available after they've gone to school and studied our art form.
Great, thank you all. So Mateen and Khandeya, I want to get started with you. And you seem the conceit for this panel beyond the jargon. In your opinion, what's keeping our field from sustained and concrete results? And do we have the will to work towards sustainability?
All right, Mateen's gonna let me start here. I usually question this. So the last time I was here, I was on the panel, was right before the shutdown for COVID, right? So right now, from my position, I think the question for everybody should be, what does the pathway look like now post-COVID? So we can't keep looking at everything as we had been with the lens before. What does the industry look like? What changes have all been made? We all experienced what happened with the shutdown on Broadway and different things. You've heard this theme come up several times now during the conference already, that students were even questioning what this is. So I think that's the framework from which I would start to say, what does that look like? What are all the options? And make those really known to students, which is what I get to do with my job. And then we have some work to do in terms of identifying what the gaps and the barriers are to accessing these things from the positions in which we stand. So I told you all I'm in higher education now, but before this I was working with a youth music program that was gearing students towards that, right? So I was looking at the lens of how do I get them from pre-college pathway into college. Now I'm looking at how do I get them from that, working with Mateen, through college and then into the hands of future employers or to become their own entrepreneurs, et cetera. and helping them to define kind of like what does success look like, what does representation look like, what does excellence really look like, and as you brought up, what does equity actually look like in each of those situations?
Awesome. I think I might speak on that a little bit too. So as somebody who's still in that space of helping the pre-college folks get to that collegiate level, a lot of my work is centered around the work that I want to do for my students, ultimately getting them from point A to point B, considering what barriers to entry might be present, and then what confines might restrict their possibilities and their sense of creativity when ideating about where they might see themselves in the musical ecosystem. And a big part of, I think, the construct that stops us from finding concrete results ultimately have to do in the people that are asking us to take on this work initially. It's the funders, right? It's the people that are asking us to say, hey, take this lump sum of cash and help this small demographic or this small group of students to do this specific thing. And while that's really helpful, after 3 years, I can say, oh yeah, I got this many kids from point A to point B. I got this many kids from high school to college. It doesn't actually give me the opportunity to ideate outside of the performance space, right? So how many of us are pushing our kids into performance education or performance degrees when they could be music managers and the licensing folks of tomorrow and the people managing artists of tomorrow and are really, really capable in those spaces, but because of grants, we have to make sure that they are attending private lessons, that they're in large ensembles, and that they're sticking to the status quo of what we thought music education was 20 years ago, right? So ultimately, I'm trying to break that construct for my kids and allow them to ideate outside of what that basic track is, because they're more than that.
Mateen, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I think about the last session that was in this room, which we now call Why Should I Stay, as opposed to Please Don't Go. But there was a conversation about what are we sending our leaders into within our organizations, and are we preparing a space for them? And it's just interesting that, again, this issue, this concern is coming up in every level that we're talking about this work. So thank you. So Ariel, I want to turn to you for a second. So when we initially had our pre-call, something you said that really struck me about this sustained and concrete results is that the sustained energy for Black arts will only last for 2 to 3 years. And that was a little jarring. Can you tell us how you are defining that period? What is causing this level of urgency for you? And how does the collective power and influence in this room ensure and offer support so that the movement continue longer than those 3 years?
Yeah, I so appreciate that question. I had a lot of privilege growing up. I'm actually originally from Detroit. I don't know if anyone else here is, but woo woo, right? I had the privilege of being under the tutelage of music educators like Damian Crutcher, who's now with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra program. He's incredible. Please follow his work if you can. Also Randy Scott, he's a jazz saxophonist here in the city. And with that, I heard really from the first time that I decided to pick up a French horn that, there were constantly these spurts of high activity and recognition of the music and culture that we create as Black people, particularly in major cities. And so, going to Howard afterwards taught me so much as well, just again about that history that occurs that's very cyclical, where, there's an uprising or call to action around a certain piece that's, societally driven, the artists respond, and everyone puts energy around that, and then we get a little comfortable. And so for me, I think I live in DC, right? So everything is politically based. I can't help it. But I think that we have to be really cognizant that, there's lessons in history that we need to draw forward, right? And so right now, there's so much energy and access and resource. And so what I think that we need to consistently just do and revisit are conversations that are happening in the larger cultural zeitgeist, like Sway Calloway and Kanye West, where Sway is saying, yo, like, let's build within ourselves, right? Like, let's stop relying on others to, like, give to us. And Kanye is, like, taking another route, you know? These are musicians. These are artists. Like, I think there's a bit of a gap that exists because we just don't, as frequently as probably we should, like, examine the divisions that we've kind of put up for ourselves and put just more collective energy and access around what we do have. So the last thing I'll just quickly say is, y'all are from Baltimore, both of you, I think. And look, if y'all haven't visited Baltimore and you're creative, please go to Baltimore. Like, there's some amazing stuff happening in Baltimore. So I just wanted to shout that out.
Khandeya, or Mateen, do you want to respond to what Ariel was saying? I know we had a chat earlier about doing art, making art that is sharing the stories of underrepresented individuals. Ms. Graves talked about it last night in her presentation, but this urgency that Ariel is speaking of, do you see it as a priority in what you're thinking about with the work along the pipeline as well?
Yeah, I definitely held on to, and I brought this so that I would stay on track. I held on to the quote, or the statement that she made, that it hurts all of us not to have these stories told, right? So we are trying to unpack through the arts the history of America, but the history of America is also a global history. So as Jennifer mentioned, I'm from Baltimore, but my family, I was born in Trinidad and Tobago. So in that, I'm an immigrant inside of the American story here, right? And so we're losing a lot of those stories, and America is built on stories of immigration. A lot of the things that we study, even though it's classical music, is from a different country, right? So it needs to start to envelop the musical orchestra, the musical ensemble needs to start to envelop all of the stories of the families of the children that we're serving, of all of the people that are in our audience, and anyone that's already decided, for me, anybody that's already decided that there's an endpoint to this movement that quote unquote started before and during COVID has already not given it the time of day that has been given to traditional musics that have had hundreds of years to now be underpinned and embedded in our daily lives and in everything that we do. We've had hundreds of years of audience participation, reaction. People didn't like all of the things that we study right now when they were introduced to their communities many years ago. They didn't like it. There were so many different articles and things that have passed down through centuries. Like at first when we heard this, the critics didn't like it at all, right? But now it's standardized. So I feel like we should allow some time for the cultural things that are unfamiliar to settle, to be exposed in those halls. And we've heard the word belonging a lot today, to have their place and their time to have belonging in those spaces that are relegated or owned or controlled by people who had access to have real estate, when in this country we know that there are many people, our ancestors included, who never had that opportunity to buy land and stand up an orchestra hall, right? So give us the time and the space to be able to have our communities come in and really re-engage with the art in the way that it really meant to be, and be fair. And that's, I think, the true sense of equity in that way.
Great. Mateen, anything from you on that one, or you're good?
I'm okay.
So actually, this is going to go back to Khandeya. You talked a tiny bit about it, but I'm proud to see so much of this work taking place at your current organization, which is Mateen and my alma mater, Peabody. Can you tell this group about Peabody's breakthrough curriculum? How is it a step in the right direction? And then what more do you believe is needed for success within and beyond a single institution?
Okay. So one other part of my role at Peabody, in addition to being the manager of community partnerships, I work alongside a team who sits in the office of Launchpad, which is our career services office. And a bunch of us are there infused into the curriculum in a way that we are also faculty members. And we are teaching students, we're taking all of the things and the services that we offer through that office and putting it in the form of classes that every student at Peabody is now exposed to. In their freshman year, they get to go through a course called Exploring Arts Careers, and they get to have people come in and visit in the class, and real-life musicians or people working in different parts of the sector, in different areas, entrepreneurs or people who are arts administrators, et cetera, come in and talk about their work. They do that in their freshman year. And then in their junior or senior year, or our graduate students, they have to go through 2 courses called Building a Brand and Pitching Your Creative Idea. In Building a Brand and Portfolio, we help them develop a digital portfolio, so your website presence, and make sure that they have resumes and different things available. So we don't only have the office open as a space for them to come in, we're actually working on the material during class. So if they've never had experience doing this before, or they feel shy or anything, they have a teacher that's walking them step by step through it, through the context of what they're familiar, so class with a grade, right? But at the end of the class, they're gonna walk out with all of these materials. In Pitching Your Creative Idea, they also get to start collaborating with others if they want, other people, classmates that they know, if they had an idea that they want to work out or bring something to life that they've never seen before or never experienced in where they are in their walk of life, and bring it to the community around. So the community we're talking about, of course, is Baltimore. To start with, they can pitch an idea to bring that to life and actually learn how to, it's a grant writing course, right? So this is their first foray into grant writing, which is also something us as individual artists, arts administrators, that we have to do. We have to learn how to do. And more so, it is about communicating your idea effectively to other people to be a part of what you want to do, right? So why should you be a part of my team? Why should you be my audience? So we're walking them through all of the steps that we as practicing musicians are doing on a daily basis, and giving them access to our network, people who want to work with Peabody, who want to come in and talk about different things, giving them access to those people earlier in their trajectory than when they kind of just hit the door running. And the idea behind the breakthrough curriculum is there's a period right after when you graduate where people have the most trouble finding their way or finding their job. And the idea behind this is by couching this in the school system, that they'll have a little bit of an easier time identifying what was said at the plenary, what moves you, what speaks to you, because you would have tried some of those things with the guidance, not on your own, with the guidance of mentors, right? And so those things I think are equally important. And that's something that goes along with it. There's a whole plan for the schools, a breakthrough plan, right? But the curriculum is designed where it walks into the classroom with students. So we're getting entrepreneurship, I said grant writing. We're talking about interdisciplinary projects because we also have dance at the school. We have music for new media. We have all of these different things now. But then we're also exposing them to education, not only just performance, arts and health, administration, entertainment. So goes back to what I said in the beginning. What are all the possibilities that are out there? I like to tell my students we exist, because I come from Berkeley, the Berkeley side, we exist in a larger entertainment industry. The arts industry is inside of the entertainment industry. So how does your music actually reach everyone? And I go back to the whole, my friend and I were just joking about this, how our exposure or the time that we recognized that we liked classical music or we were drawn to it was Bugs Bunny at the LA Phil, right? So, but we recognize that in our early memory as children as the thing, not necessarily, sometimes it's not necessarily other people that we see, but that's the thing that hooked us. And so looking at all these avenues to where your music can affect or impact people, or all the things. And then the second part of your question, you asked what more could the institutions or people do? my role is partnerships. Collaboration makes the world go round. You know that collaboration is our art form. We perform, but we collaborate. We collaborate with the audience when we engage with the audience, right? So building those partnerships, moving from siloed work, because I know we get into like, this is my institution and I represent this. You heard me say today, Peabody, Berkeley. I'm like, I haven't even said the third thing that I do. So like all of these things are part of what I do, and I try to make sure that I give space for all those things to happen, or amplify or join efforts that I think that I can be a part of. One other thing that I've seen my team do at Peabody is, as a manager, I've had to be trained on creating SMART goals. That goes all across the organization at Peabody. We're SMART goals all day. But what are the things that we want to identify and see achieved, and be specific and start small and scaffold? But the important thing for right now, for everybody in this room, is to do something. Because every time, the last conversation I heard people say, we're going to wait, right? If you don't do anything, it's not going to happen. 2 years are going to fly by, and you're going to be like, oh, we had this idea, do something, even if it's small, just to try it out. And then really having that support from the top and staff, and finding your thought partners and that team to be with those are three of the things I would say that are really important.
Yeah. I want to give Ariel a time to respond, because I saw her doing some big head nods. And as you're listening to the details of the breakthrough curriculum, and I know that you've worked with so many professional artists, how transformative could that type of training or that type of preparation be in the very young life of an artist going forward?
It's so important. I mean, while Khandeya was talking, every time we're in a conversation, I'm like, you need a raise wherever you are. Like, make sure they pay you, because, just that thing of having a space to workshop and try out and like take risk and like figure out who your tribe is so important. I'm so lucky because I have folks in the audience that I went to school with, like DeMar Woods, who's teaching now at Hampton, and my friend Richard Desenor, my best friend, he's teaching at Michigan State. And these are people that I met when I was in college. The organization I co-founded, called Arts Administrators of Color Network, with Quanice Floyd, shout outs to Quanice, also, like college connections. So it's just so important to make sure that there's like a designed space around that, So I love that.
Yeah, that's great.
The last thing I would say is that the breakthrough curriculum is now free to the world, because we have published a book that goes, that is accessible to artists, like you were saying, through a part of the OER. So that's also identifying a resource that we have as the Johns Hopkins University to kind of stand something like that up and have it published globally. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you. So we've, Ariel and Mateen, as we're talking about what Peabody is doing, but that's just one step along the journey of a life of a performer, a leader, an artist, a creative. And I think this convening can probably identify, or has already identified today, a lot of the challenges that are facing people on pre-college, pre-professional space in their sleep. But I want to know who's doing it right. And are there some individuals, organizations, leaders whose successes may be underrated or unsung because they fall outside of the conventional measures of success for our field? And we want to say in advance, we're probably not going to name everybody, but know you are loved. Just because you are not mentioned on the stage right now doesn't mean you are not doing great work. So is there anybody you want to just kind of call out for the folks here?
Oh, I got a little list. All right, let me just go ahead and take a second and actually shout out the people that are creating sustainability in these programs. The teachers that are consistently coming back to their programs year after year, spending that time, investing in their students, investing in what it takes to build healthy ecosystems for them to learn. That is special. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what that salary says. Y'all are heroes. Y'all sung heroes today. It ain't no unsung heroes in here. I'm singing for y'all, and I'll meet you at the bar later, and we can sing a little more.
That's it.
I also want to take a moment to recognize hip-hop in academia. This is a space that has really graduated in the past 7-8 years, and I'm talking Wendell Patrick over at Peabody, who's also doing work at Harvard. I'm talking like my alumni of Tuned In, my brother Bobby Woody, right over there, who's like leading our music production program in the Preparatory and helping cultivate that interest and harness that interest at the K through 12 level to prepare for a collegiate education with somebody like Wendell. As you can imagine, that space has not been supported by academia for the past decade or so. So I'm happy to have that moment and have people like Bobby who have been in our program and now can lead it from a lived experience standpoint instead of just coming in as a clinician, you know what I mean, but can really resonate with where our students are coming from. And then, of course, as a bassoonist, I got to shout out like folks like Joy Guidry, you know what I mean, who are pushing boundaries in the bassoon space. Shout out Joy. So that's probably my short list, but I got a bunch.
Great. Khandeya or Ariel?
I mean, you just said so much. That hip hop space that's emerging, well, not emerging, it's been here, but the fact that there's resources now being directed and people in the right places talking about this thing is a beautiful thing to see. I mean, okay, Professor Desenort's going to be mad at me, but over at Michigan State, he's been doing more and more around music theory and hip hop with Jay Dilla, of course, being here in Detroit. You got to shout him out, right? And so, yeah, it's just really exciting to see that there are curriculums that are shifting and changing pace. I wish there were more, though. Like, I mean, coming from an HBCU, fun fact, less than 10 HBCUs have jazz credential programs, and that's out of more than 100 in this country, right? And again, if you do just a baseline of history around jazz in America, you'll see how upsetting and challenging and unfortunate that is. And so, yeah, I mean, there's beautiful work happening. I'm just, I'm hopeful that we'll continue to get some collective action around filling some of these gaps that are definitely here, Yeah.
Well, I have to shout out Darren Atwater, Soulful Symphony, to begin with, which was my exposure when I landed in Baltimore as an immigrant. That was my exposure to what the DMV area had to offer. It was like my free orchestra on PBS television. I had Morgan State Choir on the one hand with Dr. Carter, and I had reruns of the Soulful Symphony, and the Baltimore Symphony was nearby, and I engaged in that too. But that showed me everything that was available and let me know what was out there. So we have to, I like to say that the organizations are made of individuals, and it's those individuals that are at the top of these organizations, the Sphinxes, the Gateways, the Recollective Orchestras, the people that are driving those. Simone Eccleston is somebody that we brought up this morning, who is now at the Kennedy Center running that front end. For the hip hop and jazz kind of emerging there and finding a space there together. So it's all of those individuals. We're not going to get to all name everyone, but I do want to point out that there are people in places. There was another conversation that happened this morning that said it was important to make sure that the right people are getting into those positions to make those type of decisions. And then they are able to then take those missions and then funnel it down through the organization. So I want to just say kudos to all those people who are, coming into those spaces and kind of redefining it to share the stage with everyone else.
Great, thank you all. So when I was doing research, speaking of Darren Atwater, I found a quote that was about cultivating the audience works both ways. And he said that if tomorrow the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra were to integrate with all people of color, they still would have a problem with audience development. The Black community wouldn't come to see Mozart if we did it with all Black musicians. And we've heard it said today that representation on stage is vital, it's a low-hanging fruit. But is there another area of the business you feel needs our concentration to ensure that once the stage is more reflective, there will be an audience to support them?
Yeah, I think that was me too. Audience development. So we had a conversation this year that I took Sphinx to Peabody when I went to Peabody, and we had a conversation that was probably the third in a series called The Next Normal. And we brought a lot of our colleagues into that space to have this conversation. We talked a lot about audience development and what that truly means. What does that mean to listen to the audience, for them to be a stakeholder in the process? And it really does not matter if the repertoire has not changed if I cannot see some of my neighbors on the stage, right? I say this sitting next to folks who have shared the stage recently, who have gone through this skill. All of us up here are trained, right? But you all have gone through specific training that made you capable to be called on to do certain things. You'll hear from Chelsea Green and others tomorrow, right? That when Stevie Wonder calls, she can play the music. When Robert Glasper calls, these guys can play the music. When Lizzo calls, this girl can play the music. You know what I'm saying? But that was because of the training that these conservatories and HBCUs equally gave to them. So in order for it to be representative, going back to the plenary, we have to also make sure that the audience feels like they belong, which means they have to hear themselves and see themselves on the stage as well. And feel like the hall, as I said earlier, we weren't always able to come into the hall. We talked about that when I got to Peabody too. Peabody still feels insular. The main campus downtown still feels insular to Baltimore. So what are we doing? We're taking students out of Baltimore through these community activities that I'm overseeing, that I'm helping mentor students through, and taking them into the school or taking them into the senior living communities or different spaces, because Baltimore notoriously has transportation issues that goes back to government things. I won't get into that, but government money and different things. But in order for people, certain communities to access it, we have to go to them. They may not be able to get to the Baltimore Symphony, may not be able to come down to it. It doesn't matter how free you make the concert. If they don't feel like they belong there because they can't access it, or it has historically been not a place that they're welcome, they're not gonna come. So it's kind of building that trust back and making sure we share the stage spaces with people who don't have access to it. So some people I've heard a lot of people talk about pay-as-you-can models, right? What would that mean for it to look like, a pay-as-you-can model for somebody to use the lobby of the Baltimore Symphony Meyerhoff stage or the Strathmore or something in our area where you normally would have to have $2,000-3,000 and write for a grant to do that, and you may not have a grant writer that, you may not have access to tools to get you to do those things. So.
Yeah, before I let Mateen and Ariel speak, what you were saying reminds me of when I was still working at the Kennedy Center. We had a young people's concert that we did with the National Symphony. It was during the pandemic, so we couldn't bring 2,000 students into the space like we typically would, but that concert is in a lot of ways an introduction to fourth graders on what orchestras are about. So we did it online. We called it This Is Your Space. Kwame Alexander, who's an amazing children's author, wrote a poem that basically toured all the spaces in the center, described them, and then featured a performance. But the thing that we talked a lot about is making sure that once these young people are able to come back here to this orchestra concert, as opposed to just making them feel like, I gotta sit here, I gotta be quiet, I gotta clap at the right places, I gotta go when they tell me to go, that they could say, I remember this space. I was in the Reach, I was in the Hall of Nations. These are spaces that I was told that I could enjoy and smile and have fun and make noise and enjoy the music. And even that type of welcome that you're talking about with creating those shared spaces, I think is just one of the ways that we even begin these conversations about the pipeline and the pathway. Because again, if we're not preparing the space even for our very young people, if we're not making our artists who are coming in later in the process feel comfortable just because they are the odd man out in that space, we're not doing our job. So thank you for bringing up the shared spaces. Mateen or Ariel, want to go back to you?
I can go next. I think I agree with Kay in a lot of ways, and I think that we need education managers that are willing to serve more than just the babies and the older white individuals that want to come into the space and provide a cash flow to the institution. I think that we need folks that are willing to get 10 toes into the communities that they want to serve and are willing to do the work to learn what it looks like to provide educational programs with these folks. I think we need CEOs and vice presidents of orchestras that ultimately reflect the communities that they want to serve and come from those backgrounds and really have skin in the game, instead of folks that are just gonna get the orchestra back into the green instead of working out of a deficit. I think ultimately that's what's going to bring more folks from the community into the building. I think that we also need to change the philosophy and how we even view the autonomy of the orchestra. The biggest spiritual thing that I experienced while playing with like Derek Hodge and Robert Glasper was the idea that it was more human than what you might see in a normal orchestral setting. So like when you go and hear Ein Heldenleben, it's supposed to be perfection from like the moment you sit on stage and in tune to the point that you play that last motif. Where with the Derek Hodge situation and the Robert Glasper situation, it was so much more human. There were mistakes being made. There were people saying like, oh nah, I'm gonna need you to run back that intro one more time, you know what I mean? So I can come in, right, and that's okay. I don't care about perfection when I'm going to see the orchestra. I just wanna make a real connection, right? So I think that if you get rid of the elitism, even if it means that the concert takes an extra 30 minutes, that's worth it, because that's what people want to see, and that's what people are going to pay for. So that would kind of be my fix, but we'll see if they actually listen. I hope y'all listen. I hope the orchestral, I hope the CEOs of these orchestras listen. Please, please.
Yeah, Ariel?
Yo, it was so real. It's like, okay, so bassoonist, right? Steel drums, French horn. There's a certain level of fearlessness, I think, that, has to come into play when you decide to pick up those instruments, real talk, And I sometimes wonder where that is in our creative spaces. It's like, so are we really just gonna do the same things over and over? Y'all like, come on, let's do something a little different. I will apologize right now. If you're on the 51st floor, I'm also there, and I've been playing music very loudly. Kamasi Washington, like the way he approaches the work, spiritual, for real, And so, yeah, like that's all that's really just been running through my mind is like, I'm hopeful that in order to move beyond the jargon, right, that we can tap into that fearlessness that we all have and uplift our inner purpose,
So before we get to the Q&A in a couple of minutes, my last question to the group is, I was truly getting my life last night throughout the interview with Miss Denise Graves, but what has really stuck with me since then is her description of how everyone who encounters a hopeful young performer, artist, leader, person with a dream can make an impact in their lives. And I'm paraphrasing. She said these people walk through the door and everybody has their own Stradivarius, and then we must unlock the key. So I'm looking at each of you on this stage. You are practicing musicians, you are musicians on break, singers on break, but your life in music has led you to be change makers who are working to alter culture, who are making changes in your communities, working for educational institutions, in addition to creating new organizations and developing transformative initiatives that are about artistic excellence, equity, and representation. If the pipeline as an idea isn't having the desired effects, then where should we 1,100 strong here at SphinxConnect and countless others who are watching online who care about this issue so much that we came to Detroit in the month of January. Where should we be focusing our collective efforts and our collective energy towards sustainable and concrete results?
I have two things to say. Examine where you think the pipeline should be going in the first place. I'm gonna let that sit for a second because as a teacher we were told sometimes you need to hear it twice. Examine where you think the pipeline should have been going in the first place. Because maybe that's not, as Mateen said, where your students want to go at all. We have the pleasure and joy of imparting a gift of music and the arts to another generation as a way to communicate. That's first and foremost what it is. Above all of our wishes to see them be the next, I don't know who, as Ms. Graves said, they came into the world who they are. We just helping them express themselves with the art that we have. The other thing that I encourage you all to do is really dig into the resources in your local community as much as possible. we don't give credit. You hear Ariel talk about Baltimore, but she's not from Baltimore, right? We're special, so we don't talk about it a lot, but we've lived there all our lives, so we kind of understand. But even through the lens that I'm now given in the position and the role that I now have through Peabody, I get to explore Baltimore through a different lens and really see what's out there and really get to expose that to my students in a different way. And I think that the larger institutions have a real role and a real chance and opportunity right now to do the same thing. So I like to take the phrase that I heard from early this morning in the impact session. What would it look like if? What would it look like if your local community artists, taking from the contemporary music side, were to open for the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra? Not just your youth symphony orchestras, like the local artists. What would it look like to bring community artists into the space on the same day as an orchestra performance? What would that look like, right? So start to have those what would that look like conversations and see how much resources from the community can you pull into the space as much as possible.
Thank you. Mateen or Ariel?
As somebody who serves youth and as somebody who serves families, if I am not listening to what you are telling me as a parent, as a community organizer, as somebody who I serve, then I'm not doing my job, period. And if that's the case, then I need to dip. And you need to get me up out of here, period. Because at the end of the day, I need to make the changes present to keep your kid involved in this musical programming and to keep them feeling heard and understood and represented in the classroom, to ultimately give them the strength to find their own pathway if I can't provide it, right? So the fact of the matter is I can't see every foreseeable pathway to a career in music. That's impossible. But I should be willing to learn and ideate with you to find something, to find some way of helping your kid get there or helping me lead the way and supporting them from behind, right? So I would say to anybody that is having that issue of I'm not feeling heard in the current situation that I'm in now, or I don't feel supported, go ahead and circumvent that person because they ain't the one. Go to somebody who is going to ideate and handhold with you to be at the end of that process, because at the end of the day, we are here to serve our communities and serve our students and serve these families to provide that pathway. So I would say that's kind of my answer to it. Like, circumvent that person, find somebody else who will rock with you.
Great. Thank you, Mateen.
That's super real. I mean, I just, double stamp on everything that has been shared. And Jennifer, thank you so much for this amazing piano. Like, kudos, you know? I mean, and with that, finding your tribe, I think is so important. Like, we met, you know, during the Kennedy Center. And, I mean, we've all just circled each other in so many ways. And so I think, just recognizing that not everyone's going to agree with you and love what you do, but finding the folks that get it and, like, sticking with them is super crucial. Also, when you're in cities with lots of Black folks, in particular in this country, I encourage checking out the local scene, the local music scene. So on Friday, for instance, there's an event called Pass the Aux. It's happening in Oak Park, and it's a bunch of local musicians from Detroit that are doing like an open showcase. So I would highly recommend just, getting out of, we're all in bubbles right now because algorithms, social media, that's another conversation. But recognizing that and stepping forward and being as curious as possible, particularly amongst, communities or cultures that you're not always in is a really important step.
I liked what you all said during our our chat earlier this afternoon, that we're talking a lot about pipelines, but maybe what we need is a circle. And what I'm hearing in this conversation is a lot of that we don't necessarily know what the pathway is going to be because there's so many different ways, but it's about making sure that everyone who's trying to go that way has all the resources and support they can possibly get. Great. So I want to open it up for questions. Do we have one on the hop-in?
We sure do. This one is, how can administrators better work with and encourage change from leadership that may not be as keen to change traditional practices?
That's a big one. Any thoughts on that?
We talked about this a little bit earlier, I feel like. I mean, sometimes you have to have a secret meeting. I'll just go ahead and say it. Like, go on ahead, find your people, have the secret meeting, prepare yourself, get the notes, have them on the side, and go in and, yeah, do what needs to be done. Like, it's political play, honestly. A lot of time, in larger institutions particularly, yeah. So that's what I would share.
The other side of that, I'll shout out Camille in the audience who had a panel earlier. But Camille is a fan of the word pilot. Show me a pilot. Show me. Yes. Also, Maria. I see Maria from our director of the prep. And show me a pilot. Show me. I said small, smart, actionable goals. Right. Show me kind of the smaller version of what you're trying to achieve. And then if it is successful, as you probably already know it's gonna be, then if I see it successful and I think that it's gonna work, then I might be able to come along. But so you have to know you have to learn your folks, right? Which of the folks are the show me folks? And which of the folks are like, I believe in you, I trust you, just go ahead. You have to learn those people and then figure out how to make the situation come to life. And then also, secret meetings.
Yeah, and I would to piggyback on what you said, the idea of modeling behavior, which kind of gets to the education side. One of my favorite things that I talk about with my team now is where you can't necessarily change the entire organization, but we're going to do something that's so attractive to everyone else. They're going to be so impressed, and they're going to want to get in on that on the ground floor. And we're actually watching that be a successful approach right now, but sometimes it's just about you showing, like you said, so that other people will be interested in wanting to do it. Great, we have a question over here.
My English is a little bit, okay? I'm gonna try my best. Khandeya said a couple minutes ago that we have to do something, okay? That's the reason that I take this test. Like a Latino parents, I don't know how to deal with the system, with the college and all those things, or music career, because my husband and we don't know nothing about music, but we have a little kid that he's involved in this war. We try to help. How can we deal with the college, pack, and all those things, because it's overwhelming when you don't understand that thing. And how can I help those parents who want to help their kids, but they don't speak the language? And that's worse. And another question is, what are you doing to involve the Eastern Shore of Maryland to get more close to your institutions?
Okay, so coming from my old organization, I'm not gonna call them out. Some of them are in the room, but they know what I'm about to say. I actually took Spanish when I was from 8th grade to like my second year in college. When I got to my organization and I realized that there were some students that are Spanish speaking, guess what I did? I started speaking Spanish. At the time, there are a lot of organizations out there that do not have translation services. But that is no excuse, because you have Google Translate, and if you have somebody that can read in Spanish, they can tell you if the words are translated or not. Don't ask them to do all the work necessarily, but you can ask them if this is understandable, right? We also in that, I'll shout them out. Orchids is in the house, right? So Orchids went through a lot of mechanisms when we started to do parent nights, information nights, where we made sure that we had somebody on staff to translate what was being said. And as Mateen said earlier, that may make the meeting go longer, but guess what? Our parents understand, which is more important to us than you just sending the kid, you don't know what's going on, what's happening, right? We also made sure that, also at the prep too, we make sure that we're thinking about involving them in activities that are not one-sided. So if that means, I heard someone talk about the mariachi earlier, right? So if that means we're doing Dia de los Muertos at that site, we're doing that. You know, we're doing that. We're doing Mother's Day, whatever's important to those families as well, to make sure that if they don't fully understand the experience from the one side of the world that we're already in, they're going to understand the musical experience from their cultural side of the world that they already know. And then when we pull them into this other orchestral side of the world, they kind of understand, okay, so I'm sending my kid on a trip to do X because it's part of this whole organization. And that takes investment from leadership, though, to be on board with that. It's not just the teachers. Leadership has to have that in mind. As Mateen said, if I'm not serving all of the families, then I'm not doing my job right. If any of my kids feel left behind or left out, or my families don't understand, then I'm not doing my job right. Because that translates to them being in a classroom and not knowing how to advocate for themselves, and that's not right.
And I just wanted to also respond and say that feeling of not understanding the system that you have, that is partly the function of an exclusionary system in the first place, that there are no easy answers. There's no easy place to find the solution. You have to seek it out. If you make a wrong step, you're told, that's the wrong step, we're gonna close the door to you. But this room right here and this convening right here is full of people who've experienced that, are doing everything they can to stop it. So speaking on behalf of myself, I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone else, but think of this place and these people as a resource where you can learn about those answers for you, your family, and your community as well. This lovely individual over here.
Hey, y'all. Hey, Ray. My name's Trey, and I'm from Baltimore, so I'm loving all that Baltimore love. Hands up, thumbs down, represent that B-town. Crab cakes and obey, all right?
Yo.
So I appreciate it. Okay,
Yeah.
8 round away.
Yeah.
My question, y'all are giving me life, and I appreciate just the framing of Beyond the Jargon. And so my question's about specificity, right? So I may work on a project that's about Black people, right? And everybody in the room knows the project is about Black people, but nobody's saying the word Black people, right? And we're talking around Black people, it's a bad word. And so how do we encourage and help leadership get over their fear of the specific, even when being specific is that the purpose of the program, is the purpose of the progress? What do we do in those situations?
I talked a lot today. We're all going to answer. We're just figuring out who's going to start.
I'll go back to my seat while you think about it, so I can sit down.
I mean, I can start. I think at the end of the day, some programs and some folks in leadership are asking the person working on the grant or working on the project to lead the way, right? So ultimately, they don't know the answers. They might know the answers or be afraid of the language, and they might need your strength as somebody who comes from the community or is really serving the community or has that lived experience. So never be afraid to say it or identify the specific need or the specific demographic you want to serve because your supervisor doesn't necessarily want to call it by what it is. At the end of the day, it does take a courageous person to say, yes, this is who I serve, this is the need, and this is how I'll go about it. And I can't be afraid of that, period. Do you. Go Baltimore.
I would just say at this point that organizations cannot be afraid of backlash, because you should be afraid of backlash if you don't address the issue, right? We've heard it again today, bottom line, bottom line, bottom line. If you don't address the issue, if you don't include me, then there's gonna be an issue. So you might as well just say, we're doing it and just not relegate it to Black History Month, or not relegate it to Native American History Month, or Caribbean American History. Actually just include it. Call it what it is. Call it you're studying about this artist, et cetera, et cetera. Do it. We have 12 months of the year. Whatever you want, whenever you want in the programming season, we all well, I'm talking about orchestras, but other arts institutions, we all program out a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. You have time, right? It's, you know, I think you should be afraid of, I think people think that the volume of people that they have to include becomes a lot, but if you already are planning it in ahead of time, you're gonna get used to it, and it's gonna become a part of you so much that it doesn't need to have an individual focused time to do it, so that you're really addressing everybody all the time. We walk around as what we are all the time. You see me outside, I'm Black. I'm actually Caribbean, but I'm also Black, and I know that I'm Afro-Caribbean, right? But you see what you see. But it's important to people that you recognize them, right? That you actually do say, hey, we're celebrating you. You cannot be afraid of, there may be a few people who are distrusting of you, who have had bad experiences before with you. You're gonna have to allow them their time to say what they gotta say. You're gonna have to take it. We heard today about having feedback for exit interviews. I think the last panel, exit interviews, retention interviews. You're gonna have to have the audience have their time and tell you how they feel about being left out, period. You're gonna have to take it on the chin and keep it moving, but you're gonna say that this program is celebrating Black people, period.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions on the hop-in, or I just want to make sure if there's one more.
We do. Follow up on audience development. How do we better audience development for BIPOC audiences for classical music, public radio, or classical music digital spaces and podcasts?
How do we do better audience development for, I will say we could talk about targeting emails and marketing and all of those lovely things, but I think it's about building relationships with those communities, and it gets back to what Khandeya was saying earlier, that if we're not talking to these people, to the people out in our community, and not just saying, I'm gonna sell you this, and you're gonna come, and it's gonna change your life, but to say, how are you doing? And then that's the conversation. And then hopefully at some point they trust us enough, or they want to work with us enough, or they know us enough that, oh, I want to pay attention and I want to participate in something you are doing. That is not an easy answer, I know, but it is the way to really truly build community and then also develop audiences, in my view. Okay.
Agreed.
Okay.
Hello, something that we often talk about, and I'm from Baltimore too, so we're in the house.
See, I told y'all, Baltimore. Anyway, sorry.
We often talk about pathways, and there's something that arts organizations sometimes erroneously does is they misdiagnose the patients, which I call the community. How do we keep that balance where we are providing community what they need and what they may desire? Because you can't desire what you have never experienced. We had a school CEO, and I can't say the district, but they asked a question about providing arts programming in different schools, and the answer was so cringy. The answer was that we need to let the community decide what they need as far as arts education, and I said, well, what if they've never had it? How do you know you need something? So what does that balance look like for arts organizations?
You know?
Historically, I mean, every organization say that they do this, but I think they need to actually, at this point, go back and reassess the questions that they're asking, but they all do focus groups, they all do surveys, they all do visits into the community, but at this time, we need to listen. You need to reframe the questions, and I would dare say, add a community member if you can, Because I know a lot of boards and makeups are dealt with, folks who can bring in money, et cetera, et cetera. But if you can add a community member that really has a stake at play into the organization on the board level or at that decision-making level where we get to ask the questions or tell you the questions that are coming up from the community, that will help solve half of the issue because you're actually getting feedback directly from the source. Why is it that you're not coming, or what are the things that parents are saying in your classroom, right? In your band room or different things. What do they want to see? What didn't make sense, et cetera, et cetera. I think you need to listen and react to that feedback differently now that we're post-COVID so that people know that they can access you, but they also know that you're listening and willing to change and know when that's going to happen.
Thank you. So unfortunately, the big stop button is about to hit, but if you'd like to come up and ask your question to the group once we close the panel, I hope that you will. Thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you for this wonderful panel. Let's keep the conversation going. Enjoy the rest of the conference.